Here's the thing. Birds are real, and it's mean to say that they're not. You boys are back. It's Kesh. I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Sam. Well, it's just been 1 week for all our listeners, but boy, does it feel like longer for us, because it has been longer for us.
It's been at least 2 weeks, right?
Couple
Because
weeks.
you've been home.
I've been away.
Back in Connecticut.
Yep.
I've been here, but we haven't been here together recording.
So,
yeah. Let's get into some birding updates.
Yeah,
for both
what have you
of us.
been up to? You seen anything good past couple weeks?
I have seen some cool stuff. A lot of lifers for me. 3 today, which we'll get into a little later. Did get a nice pic of a northern harrier. Stay tuned on my Instagram. I probably will post that at some point. My username is photos with Gishev. You'll find me in the bio of our podcast Instagram. Saw a movie.
A movie?
The Wild Robot.
Ooh.
It's definitely a kid's movie, but you know what? I'm a kid at heart. So.
I've been hearing good things about it.
Yeah, it's actually really good. Definitely gets you in the feels at times, and it obviously has a robot. But this robot, kind of spoilers, not really, is kind of raising a bird.
Ooh.
And they're navigating how to, because the robot doesn't know anything about the bird, and the bird's a baby, so it doesn't know how to grow up and stuff. So I don't know. It's very touching. Talks about migration.
Ooh,
Going back to episode 2. Yeah, really good movie. Highly recommend.
Nice. Well,
apparently they're working on a sequel for it too.
I believe it. I'm going to check that out soon. I also saw a movie. I watched this particular movie because of an email we got from a listener. Now, this email came from a user named Randy Spaghetti. I'm saying the full name because I know that is not the person's actual name, so I'm still not doxing.
Okay.
But the question was, have you ever seen The Big Year, which was a movie from 2011 with Jack Black, Owen Wilson, and Steve Martin?
I've never seen the movie. I have heard of the term since getting into birding, like a big year or a big day kind of thing.
Well, so I watched the movie today, actually. And it follows these 3 people who are on a mission to be the best birder in the world by, in 1 calendar year, seeing the most birds in North America as possible. And it was fine. It was an aggressively fine movie. It was listed as a comedy. I don't think there was more than like 2 jokes in the whole movie, which is weird with those actors, but
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
Also, like, it was a sincere movie. Like, the person who made it very clearly knew about birding and cared about birding and didn't treat birding like a joke, which was kind of nice.
It's interesting because like you wouldn't think that would like box office wise would be like a good premise for a movie, just for like the general public.
Yeah, I don't think it was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I might still have to watch it though, just given what it's about.
Yeah, honestly, I would casually recommend it. If it sounds interesting to you, it's probably worth it. It's like an hour 40. Like, it's not very long. So.
Right.
But the reason I watched it today, of all days, was of course because today is the big day.
Today is the big day across maybe the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who could say?
At least maybe a big weekend.
Yeah, big weekend certainly. But what we're talking about is it's October right now. Today is a day that many birders and places where birders gather to look at birds will sort of host these events where they try to see how many birds they can see in one day. So it's like
at the same site.
At the same site.
Yeah.
So it's like 1/365th of a big year.
They call it the Big Sit at John Hines. I'm sure they call it that elsewhere, but this is what they specifically called it at John Hines. We got there at around like 7-ish. We stayed till like maybe like 10, 11. But these birders were out there at 5 o'clock in the morning. They heard and saw a great horned owl. I should have been there at 5 in the morning if I really wanted to see a great horned owl.
I didn't even know we were allowed to be there at 5.
I think the gates open at 6. I'm not sure how they got there at 5.
I don't know, but
they got some special passes or something. Anyway, and they were there until like sunset, or like at least like 6, 7 or something.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. And we stopped by. I'm certainly a bit shy when I go birding. I am a bit reluctant to talk to people. You're much better at that. Normally you can walk up to someone and start talking, and I'll just kind of stand by you, and I think I'm smiling. I'm probably just grimacing, but
I mean, I think the anxiety's definitely there, But, then you're just like, you know what? If I make a fool out of myself, whatever. It's fine. I'm just here to talk about birds.
Right?
Yeah, I'm just here to talk about birds.
But it was a really nice time, I thought. It really just like...
Yeah, great. I felt good in my soul after that day.
At John Hines, there's this like double-decker observation deck, right? Kind of against the water, but also against the forest. And at the height of it, I don't know, there were probably 30, 40 people up there.
Yeah, exactly. Picture just like 30, 40 birders. There's like a central table, and people are there all day, so they have like food and stuff for themselves. And there's this big board where the person who's leading this, named Deb, shout out Deb, shout out Mad, Al, Marty, Chuck, Carol, and then some of these other people that were there. Everyone's super nice, super great. But Deb was in charge of the board. Anytime someone identified something or heard something, Deb would write the time and the name of the species. And I think at the end of the day, they ended up seeing 67.
67 was the number I heard. Yep. Which is pretty great.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I would love to see 67 different species in one day. I guess I could have, but...
They also had another board where they kept track of like birds that, they expect to see every year at the Big Sit, and birds that maybe aren't super common or maybe are only seen once at the Big Sit. I thought that was also super cool because we were able to see the history from back to like 2007 as to like what birds were around then, maybe not around now, and vice versa.
Yeah, I thought it was all very cool. And one of the questions Mr. Spaghetti asked us in relation to the big year was, would you yourselves attempt a big year? After this big day, my initial thought is, well, yeah, that would be great. I love seeing birds. I love like seeing a lot of birds. But the thing about the big year, certainly in the movie, was that like these people spent their entire year traveling across the country just looking at birds, which sounds great, but I'm never going to be able to retire in my life. I'll never be able to afford to do that. So I think, unfortunately, the answer is no.
Yeah, and I don't know, 365 days of birding, I'm probably going to need a break in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And also, I feel like we're just going to need to be a little more knowledgeable about birding in general and like what we're trying to see.
Because if we did it for 365 days straight, I feel like we'd be pretty knowledgeable.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's true. But I'm just thinking today, like, I was looking at the specific bird down in like the shrubbery, and it was like, lighting wasn't great just because it was covered by foliage and it was a dark bird, so it was like hard to see exactly what it was. And me and this guy, we're looking at the same thing. And he's like, "Oh, you think that's a rusty blackbird?" And I was like, "Dude, I have no clue."
Yeah, I've never heard of a rusty blackbird before.
Yeah, but it was a rusty blackbird and uncommon to the area.
Apparently.
Generally, I don't think it's technically considered endangered, given what Deb said, but we're seeing less and less of them. So that was a lifer for me, and that was great.
Lifer for me, too.
I was kind of involved in seeing it, but this other guy was like, I didn't know what I was looking at, really. Also saw a ruby-crowned kinglet. That was new for me. That was really great.
Yep. I heard people talking about it. I did not see it, but
it was a little tiny guy, little red marking on his head.
Little ruby crown.
Little ruby crown there, and it was there in a flash and gone. I'm glad I got a pic of it. I don't think I knew it was a ruby crown kinglet until I looked at the pic and I saw its little ruby crown. Yeah. Yellow rumped warbler, also new for me. I'm sure you've seen those before.
I saw my first one last week.
Yep. Nice. But yeah, the whole thing was just great. Everyone really happy to help, really knowledgeable. I talked with this guy Marty about camera gear for a bit.
So
one more quick thing.
Yep.
A lot of things have happened in the world since we last recorded. Obligatory downer part of the episode really quick. These hurricanes have been terrible for North Carolina. Asheville specifically had a lot of damages, and the Hurricane Milton in Florida, Gulf of Mexico. A little bit of levity in the situation. I saw a tweet where people were worried about evacuating, people like couldn't find loved ones, or it's terrible. And then you see this guy named Seth Buddy, active on eBird, just recording birds like right outside of Asheville. So the tweet was something like, if anyone's looking for Seth Buddy, rest assured he's fine. He saw a double-crested cormorant, he saw a pileated woodpecker, he saw a red-eyed vireo. He's doing fine. I don't know, I just thought that was a funny tweet.
Yeah,
it's right outside Asheville in a place called Beaver Lake Bird Sanctuary.
Well, there you go. Yeah, birding doesn't stop for anything. But yeah, I mean, I know that we specifically have listeners, my family living in Asheville, and yeah, just our hearts go out to you. Same to the victims of Hurricane Milton in
like Tampa, I think
in
was the hardest
Tampa,
hit.
Florida. I know we have some listeners in Florida too. So hope you're all doing well. All right. Time for our hoot topic. Again, these check-in questions we're calling hoot topics. I think that's pretty good. This one comes from Lauren, also inspired by another listener, Ethan.
New listener, Ethan.
New listener, Ethan.
But big fan.
Shout out, Ethan.
From what I hear, yeah.
First question. What flying type Pokemon do you wish were real?
There's a lot of flying type Pokemon out there.
There are a lot of flying type.
I'll let you start while I think.
Now, for those who don't know, I'm a huge Pokemon fan. Not just talking about Generation 1, I'm talking about all of them. But for all of you who maybe are more casual towards Pokemon, I'll start with one that you probably know. It's from the first generation. It's from the TV show. You all know it. You all love it. I'm talking about Doduo over here, right? Yes.
That's not what I thought you were gonna pick with the Gen 1 flying type, but there you go.
Well, last episode we talked about flightless birds, and boy, I really just can't stop thinking about them. So Doduo, an ostrich with 2 heads, twice as good, can stick its head in twice as much sand. Haha, just kidding, that's a myth still. But I do have some thoughts beyond Generation 1. My first initial thought was I really like the Drifloon and Drifblim line.
Yeah, but aren't they kind of scary?
Well, that's the thing. If you read their Pokédex entries, they like snatch children up in the middle of the night and like kill them.
And they're and they're nowhere to be seen. They just like lift them up because Drifloon and Drifblim, they're like their design is that of like a hot air balloon or like a balloon. They have these little arms, I guess, which they just use to grab children.
Snatch children up.
Yeah, it's very scary. So wait, so you want that in real life?
Well, I was thinking them for a second, but then I remembered about the killing children part.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I thought maybe not. So I settled on Noibat, which is not a bird. It's a bat. I like bats too. But the thing about bats is they look a little scary. They got kind of scary faces sometimes. Noibat has a really cute face, big old head, big old ears, tiny little wings. I just think it'd be really nice to have some Noibats in the world.
I don't know what gen that is. It's a later gen, right?
6.
Yeah, also a big Pokemon fan. I feel like I have fallen off, in the later gens. Like I feel like I'm good up to Gen 4, but my knowledge like Gen 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is not that great. So I think some of my choices are going to be some from the earlier gens. You mentioned Noibat. I was going to pick Crobat.
Another good bat.
Another good bat.
Also not a bird.
Also not a bird. My thought about Crobat is that it's very fast, very ninja-like. I just like the stealth aspect of it. It's very quick and quiet. I don't know, kind of like me.
One thing about it, kind of like you, yeah. One thing about Crobat that I think goes a little underreported is they're kind of used as like the evil team Pokemon, right? Like Team Rocket uses Crobat. Yeah. But here's the thing about Crobat. The only way you can get a Crobat is by leveling up a Golbat with high friendship.
With high friendship, yes.
So these are like pals. Crobats are pals. So I think that's a great choice.
Yeah, I forgot about that aspect. Yeah, that's a good one. And then my second choice would be a Gen 3 Pokemon. I think it's Gen 3. Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, it might be Gen 2. I feel like I thought it was Gen 3 because it's in the Gen 3 games, but it might be a Gen 2 Pokemon. Xatu.
Classic thinking it's Gen 3. It is Gen 2.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Xatu, I actually don't know what bird it's like supposed to be.
It's kind of
like a totem.
Sort of.
Isn't it like a totem kind of thing? Yeah. But it's a bird and it has psychic powers. It can like tell the future. It played a pivotal role in some of like the more spin-offy games, like the Mystery Dungeon and all that. So I really like Xatu just because of that. So that's my pick there.
It'd be great. So that does bring us to part 2, where for anyone who's still listening, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, we did sorry if you don't like Pokemon, but
hopefully
you stuck with it.
This time we are going to talk about real birds, but also still Pokemon. So part 2 of this question, also asked by Lauren, which real-life bird do you think could hold its own in a Pokemon battle? Bonus points if that bird is not a raptor. I do have some thoughts initially, and my thoughts come from actually seeing birds that stand up to raptors. So something that you may notice, it's kind of a funny thing that you'll see if you live in an area where you see hawks flying around pretty often, or even vultures. A lot of times you'll see a hawk like fleeing in terror from a tiny little bird.
Yes.
And a lot of times that bird is a blue jay. So I think a blue jay could do. I don't think its stats would be very good, but I don't think it would care. I think it would go so hard. I think it would be a great addition to the Pokemon universe.
Yeah, it's got that spunk.
Bravado. Yeah.
Yes. Do you know what that behavior is called? We're actually going to get into that a little later in the episode today.
No, I'm excited to learn.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll leave it for then. Spoiler alert, we're talking about corvids today.
Corvids.
Blue jay is a corvid, and my answer to this question is also going to be another corvid. I would say a raven.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So
Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes, we're gonna read the whole poem later.
All right.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, ravens a lot bigger than crows. I don't think I've seen a raven before in real life, but from what people say about ravens is you never get used to how like big they are, and they're very intelligent. Mm-hmm. They are very resourceful. I feel like they could just trick, like fool whatever Pokemon it's playing or fighting against. And
nice support Pokemon. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I did live in Colorado for a couple of years there, and there were a lot of ravens there, and I can confirm they are larger than you'd expect, and they're also just, you can tell they're very smart.
Mm-hmm. A common question a lot of people have is the difference between the calls between crows and ravens. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people think they're interchangeable. They're actually like quite different. The crow, which we'll play now, and the raven, which we'll play now.
Definitely distinctive.
Definitely distinct. Yeah, the crow, we see your typical caw, 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 mm-hmm. caw, which should be pretty familiar for most people. And the raven call seems a little more croaky, a little more guttural, low.
Like if a crow ate a frog.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's what it sounds like to me, at least.
Yeah. No, I definitely remember hearing that, and that just floods the memories right back.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's a good segue into the main topic for today. Want to talk about corvids in general, and also want to talk about the role they've played in mythology and folklore and throughout, many different cultures. Kind of want to make this a somewhat recurring episode idea about just like a specific bird or a family of birds like corvids today, and talking about how they've been perceived and documented throughout history, mythology, folklore. So yeah, let us know if you guys like this episode, like that idea, and if you want a specific bird featured in an episode like this, let us know as well. So I know we have a lot of corvid fans out there, and I think it's going to be cool to talk about them through the lens of like mythology and folklore, because as we will see throughout history, many like unrelated civilizations, cultures perceive corvids, ravens, crows, that kind of thing in similar and different ways. And I think it's interesting to see like why that may be the case and just like parse that out. But before that, I think it's also important to maybe talk about like why there are a lot of birds in mythology and throughout history and like passed down through stories, because it seems like from what I've seen that a lot of cultures have a sort of reverence for birds in general. Why do you think that is? So
I have some thoughts on this. Mm-hmm. I know that humans are mammals, but mm-hmm. we don't really interact with each other the way a mammal typically does, which is by scent. A lot of mammals will use their sense of smell to kind of identify each other, mm-hmm. to mark their territory, obviously.
And we see that obviously with like dogs, cats.
We see that with dogs, cats, bears. But birds, on the other hand, they use sound a lot. Bird song, right? So I think it's really easy for humans to connect with birds because we communicate in very similar ways. But then there's also the aspect of birds where they can do something that we just cannot physically do, which is fly, mm-hmm. which is very cool. Yeah. So I imagine it has something to do with that.
Yeah, that's spot on. So I think you called out 2 out of the 3 things I was going to touch on. The bird calls, which is kind of like you said, like a similarity between humans and birds in the way we communicate. And also something that's different between us, the fact that we can't fly and birds can. So I think like the reverence and like the deification of a lot of these birds is from the fact that they can fly and we can't. I draw some similarities to like stories and folklore about ocean creatures, because like obviously humans can swim, but like not to the extent of like, so like the ocean is kind of an unknown for humans as well as the air. Or maybe it's more like humans have kind of conquered land, but we have not conquered air and sea.
Right.
I mean, and you can look at a lot of different religions. There is something like divine about flight, and people think of heaven as, or like different concepts of different realms as like away into the sky.
Higher
So like
plane.
a higher plane, yeah. So birds can reach that,
Mm-hmm.
and we can't. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And like you said regarding the bird calls, a lot of cultures interpret different meanings from like these different bird calls that you hear. Because like we go to a relatively public place, but if you're out like in the woods, alone, immersed in nature, there's something to just like hearing all these calls that like kind of makes you feel something.
Yeah.
And I'm sure indigenous cultures have like way more intuition and connection to nature than us, and therefore like they have been able to derive different meanings from like different calls they hear
Right, definitely.
with different birds. And the last thing I wanted to mention was the behaviors, like the displays of intelligence, mating displays, and like timings of appearance, like the seasons in which different birds appear. These all are like different characteristics that lead to why we have seen so many birds throughout stories passed down, and in particular roles in different cultures. Today, we're specifically talking about corvids. Sam, can you name a few corvids?
I can name a few, and then I might name some that aren't, but jays, crows, ravens, magpies,
Magpies, good.
grackles. That's all I got in my bag.
I actually don't like. I know we talked about it. Are grackles corvids?
I've always thought so. I could be completely wrong.
I don't think they are. No, they're blackbirds.
Good
So
riddle.
no on the grackle, but yes on the magpie. So another one, common one, rook,
Oh, yeah.
and nutcrackers, jackdaws. I mean, there's a longer list, but I think we named the main ones: raven, crow, rook, and jays. So they're all in the same family of Corvidae. Let's talk about some similarities and differences. What do you think some similarities are between these different species?
I think I have to start with, I know that they're all just very intelligent birds.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
know,
definitely compared to like other birds, they are shown to have a more developed like prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain associated with like higher thinking.
Yeah. I've heard that crows specifically, I assume ravens too, they'll remember people who are nice to them and maybe bring them like shiny things as presents. And they'll also remember people who are mean to them.
Yeah.
And they can communicate that with their other crows in the area.
Yeah.
And that's when you get like dive bombed by crows if you've been mean to crows before.
Yeah, that's great. I'm talking later about a study that goes exactly through that.
Awesome.
So that's great. Another key similarity I think is that they're all scavengers,
Right.
kind of opportunistic in that way, which kind of explains why they are pretty widespread.
Right. It's similar to vultures, I guess. You see vultures pretty much anywhere you go.
Yeah, exactly. And then some differences. Let's talk about like some like body differences. Like we talked about the ravens a little larger
Obviously,
than a crow comparatively.
Right. And then, I mean, the outlier of like the main ones I'm thinking of is the blue jay, right? Not that dark color, kind of a bright blue, white, and has that crest. I know magpies have some like white coloring on them as well. And there's a big range of sizes.
Yeah, I think we typically consider corvids to be like at least a medium-sized bird, like to a pretty large bird.
By medium-sized bird, we're talking like blue jay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. The rook, if you don't know what a rook looks like, look up a photo. It looks pretty similar to that of a raven or a crow. So it has that like distinct black body, kind of iridescence in the wings. So when the sun shines on it, you get like some like blues and greens. But it has this very white face, which kind of like leads into the bill. So like that's pretty distinct for a rook.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I was not able to get any like confirmation on this, but I feel like this is looking very plague doctor-y to me.
That does look very plague doctor. It's got kind of that curved bill, and it does look like it's wearing a mask.
Yeah. So I guess I didn't look into it like super in depth, but I couldn't get anything. Like I got things that were like, oh yeah, it looks like a corvid, it looks like a raven, but like I feel like it may have been specifically derived from a rook, from what I'm seeing like
I believe
on the
it.
photos.
Where do rooks live?
Yeah, it looks like rooks can typically be seen throughout Europe, extending into like Scandinavia, eastern Russia. So they're pretty widespread across that like Eurasian continent.
Got it. And that's, I'd say, where the plague doctor kind of archetype came from.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then as for the ravens are great, and crows are great in wingspan.
Yeah.
Another one of those killdeer type birds where if you pick one of them, or if you see one of them, you're having a good day.
Yep. Any raven, arguably the best bird in wingspan.
Yeah. We have the Chihuahuan raven.
And the common raven.
And the common raven. So what is your impression of how these corvids are viewed in like folklore? Like good, bad, depends, maybe a little bit both?
Yeah, I read a little bit about this a while back. I think there's kind of perhaps a little good, a little bad. I think a lot of times they're pretty closely associated with death. I would assume that comes from the scavenging thing.
Yes, you're spot on with that. In more European history, in a lot of battlefields, crows, ravens would circle around, they would swarm, and then once people are dead, they would pick at their dead bodies,
Clean
right?
it all up.
Exactly. So that's where the association with death comes. If you see a raven or a crow looming, it's kind of a bad omen in a lot of these contexts, right? But we'll get into how that may not be the case in certain cultures. So going off of that, what is a group of ravens called? Because we know a group of crows is called a murder.
Ooh, I know this one. I've forgotten it. I know it though. It's not.
I think it's cooler than a murder.
Yeah.
Of crows,
Oh shoot.
in my opinion.
It's not a parliament. That's owls. It's.
Oh, okay. Well, spoiler alert: a parliament is also the name for a group of rooks.
Oh.
Yeah.
Shoot, I don't remember. What is it?
It's an unkindness.
An unkindness is sick.
That's great.
That's
I love that.
incredible.
So a lot of what I learned about ravens comes from this book, 10 Birds That Changed the World by Stephen Moss. I think you referenced that book in one of the earlier episodes.
I believe about the flightless birds.
About the flightless
dodo.
birds.
Had a good dodo chapter.
The most famous legend, like English legend, is that the English kingdom will fall if ravens of the Tower of London die or are removed. 6 ravens have been kept in the tower for several centuries. There's a couple of different stories that have led to this 6 ravens in the tower thing. I don't know if any of them are true or if one's more true than the other, but basically the king at the time, the monarch Charles II, ordered the removal of all these ravens because this astronomer Royal Flamsteed was annoyed by these ravens, like cawing, picking on him, like messing with his astronomy.
He must have been mean to a raven.
And then the story goes that someone informed King Charles of the legend, and he decided to move the observatory to a different city instead. So there's been a lot of superstition around this English legend that, like, if the ravens go missing, the monarchy will fall, the British Empire will fall, right?
Right.
Something like that kind of did happen. So at the end of World War II, there's kind of a fall of the British Empire in terms of its like colonialism into like other parts of the world. And something occurred where 3 of the 6 ravens died, and then of the 3 remaining ravens, the 2 of them killed one of the remaining ones, and then they flew away. So there's no more ravens in the Tower of London. And then shortly after, British Empire falls.
Right.
And then in 1946, new ravens were installed into the tower, and now there's a raven master.
Right.
That takes care of the ravens, makes sure they're well taken care of.
Well, that would be a pretty... I don't know. Do you think that would be a good job?
I don't know if I would necessarily want to work for the British monarchy, but just like the title of Raven Master might make me reconsider my entire moral system here. So continuing in the same vein of ravens in like English history, you mentioned it earlier, The Raven, great poem by Edgar Allan Poe. I think I pretended that I read it when I was a kid.
Oh yeah, me too.
Did you actually read it?
No, never.
Okay, great. So I actually read it this time around.
Whoa.
So yeah, let's just do a quick little reading on the podcast. It's only like 108 lines.
Oh, great.
Yeah, just get it started.
Okay.
From memory.
Yeah, okay. What a bad day Dad had. Dad is sad. Hop on pop.
You're quoting a Dr. Seuss book.
Yeah, that's not how it goes though.
Okay. I thought you were... Okay, so...
No, I've never read it.
Okay. Do you know what it's about at all?
I mean, I feel like Edgar Allan Poe was all about death. So I assume it's about death.
Edgar Allan Poe, from what I understand, in this time of his life when he wrote The Raven, was like feeling pretty sad, pretty depressed. The poem is about a man who is heartbroken over the recent death of his beloved Lenore. And so he's lonely in his room, and a raven kind of taps on his window. And he lets the raven in, and he keeps saying nevermore. The raven keeps saying nevermore, nevermore, nevermore. And it's kind of like this guy being lonely and in despair, and he is speaking to this raven. This raven is clearly just saying the same thing. It's kind of left a little ambiguous whether like the raven like is knowingly doing this or whatever. But I think the gist of the whole thing is that this man is in such grief and despair that he's asking this raven questions. The raven just saying nevermore, nevermore, nevermore. And this man is just kind of asking him like questions to where like he's spiraling.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like basically like the more he talks to this raven, the more he's like losing it basically, and like it's kind of like self-inflicted because this raven's just saying, you know, the same thing over and over, but this guy is it's kind of like a one-sided conversation, and he's kind of losing it in that sense.
Right.
This is all caused by like himself and him like his like inner thoughts kind of coming out, and he kind of takes that on the raven. He grows angry, yells at the raven, and he calls it like a thing of evil.
Yeah, that's just like, you know, people ascribing like evil death to ravens, scavengers that actually, like, you know, before we had more automated systems, like those were the things that kept like streets clean, kept diseases from running rampant.
Yeah. So yeah, I just thought that was a cool example of how, again, the perception of these birds is like perpetuated or like shown in you know, different aspects of people's lives.
Seems kind of self-aware, at least in this poem.
Yeah, exactly. I've never watched Game of Thrones. Have you?
I did.
You did? You watched the whole thing?
I stopped at like the second to last season.
Okay.
For some reason, I don't remember. I think I just got bored.
Yeah, so in this book, the 10 Birds That Change Your World, the author talks about how George R.R. Martin gained some inspiration from Odin's ravens from Norse mythology. I do know a little bit about Norse mythology due to this game I played called God of War. So from what I understand, Odin, which is this
Thor's dad.
Yeah, I know people know this shit from like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I haven't watched any of those movies. So Odin has these two ravens called Hugin and Mugen. One of them symbolizes memory, and one of them symbolizes thought. And Odin is this. Is he considered a god? Yeah.
Yeah, he's like all powerful.
Yeah, Odin's one of these like all powerful gods, and
the All-Father.
The All-Father, as they call him, and he's very kind of like infatuated with knowing everything, knowledge, right? So he gives up one of his eyes for the sake of knowledge, and it kind of makes him paranoid, not knowing everything that's going on in his 9 realms of Asgard, or like what are the 9 realms called?
Well, Asgard's the one he's chilling in. Midgard is Earth.
Yeah.
And then I don't know the rest.
So like the 9 realms, he wants to know everything. So basically, these two ravens, Mugen and Hugin, Mugen and Hugin, travel throughout these different realms, and they basically give him information, tell him what's going on in the 9 realms.
Yeah. Kind of like carrier pigeons. They go out, get information, bring it back.
Yeah, and I think this kind of like ties into what I was saying before of like how birds are like perceived as divine, like being able to go to these different realms. And in Norse mythology specifically, I think Freya specifically brings like dead soldiers to Valhalla. But I thought, you know, there was a connection there between what we saw in like English history, where people thought, you know, crows were like harbingers of death because they were on battlefields, and once the soldiers died, they like ate them.
Yep.
Throughout history, I think there's been some good and bad with the ravens. Earlier on, when people were hunter-gatherers, humans kind of saw them as friends. Like, there was kind of like a trio, like the human, the fox, and the raven. And they all kind of helped each other out in different ways. And as humans transitioned to less of a nomadic lifestyle and more as like settlers and farmers, the relationship and the perception kind of changed from that of cooperation to more of like a rival and a foe. So I think it's just interesting to note that as humans themselves or ourselves change and our wants and needs change, our relationship to these birds change, and therefore their roles in our stories change as well.
That makes sense, I guess. Like, what's the saying? Art imitates life. Would you call mythology art? I don't know. I feel like maybe
in a sense. Another thing that I think exemplifies that point is a section in a book from Edward A. Armstrong. In his book, 1958 book called The Folklore of Birds, if you want to read this excerpt.
To see one raven is lucky, 'tis true, but it's certain misfortune to light upon 2, and meeting with 3 is the devil.
Kind of abrupt. Yeah, so again, I think that excerpt just like really clearly shows that like in some aspects, ravens, corvids in general, are seen as good, lucky, and then in certain aspects, Not very much so.
The devil.
The devil, exactly.
Yeah.
Moving on to crows. Longtime listener Tully sent me a specific study about intelligence in crows. Basically what you said earlier in the episode. So I thought the study was pretty cool. So the study that Tully sent me was called Lasting Recognition of Threatening People by Wild American Crows by Marsloff et al.
Ooh.
Long story short, they had 3 different groups. They had just normal trappers with no mask on their face trap and tag these birds. They had a neutral mask and they had a dangerous mask. Mm-hmm. And what they saw was that the crows that were exposed to this quote unquote dangerous face while they were trapped and tagged, those crows were more likely to mob, which is the behavior that you were talking about earlier with the blue jays and the raptors. Basically making harsh vocalizations and kind of chasing. So they did see mobbing, like, in general, like with no mask, with neutral mask, and with dangerous mask. But the dangerous mask, there was a lot more harsh vocalizations, a lot more mobbing. And a lot more crows were involved too. Which lends to the idea that they're able to share this information.
Right.
Or communicate it somehow. Or maybe it's like kind of just like doing what the group does. But we don't see that with the other masks, right?
Right.
So,
I believe it's communication.
Yeah, exactly. And, birds warn each other all the time. Like we heard a red-winged blackbird today presumably call out to warn other birds to a raptor. We saw that it was a ring-billed gull and it wasn't a raptor, but that was kind of funny.
They look similar.
They do. But this is slightly different than that because this is a learned avoidance. Like it's not these dangerous, these like random masks that, they're unique. They were created for the study. They're not like in nature, right? So it's a learned behavior which they're communicating.
Right.
Similar to the raven, we see reference to crows when different cultures talk about sending or like people going to the afterlife, right? Mm-hmm. In Celtic, Scottish mythology, is similar to that of English. It's considered a bad omen, brings darkness and death, largely associated with the fact that crows are picking apart like dead people on battlefields. So there's kind of the idea that they transport people to the afterlife. Similarly, in Hindu mythology, the crow is considered a sacred bird that represents ancestors and departed souls. So during there's this annual ceremony called Pitru Pashka. Hindus offer food to crows as a way of honoring their dead ancestors. So
it's a better relationship with crows.
Yeah, but it's similar in the fact that they're talking about the deceased and afterlives, but maybe the perception is a little different.
Yeah,
right?
Interesting.
Moving on to rooks here. The initial puppets that they have in farms to scare away birds, they were initially for rooks. So not even for crows. So they should be called scare rooks.
Scare rooks.
Not scarecrows, yeah.
Harder to say, kind of like scarecrow. But yeah, they're initially for the rooks. The theme of kind of good and bad also is attributed to rooks here, like in more in English mythology, because that's where a lot of these rooks were. If someone had a rookery, so that's where the term rookery comes from. Oh, okay.
And if they had a rookery on their land and it was happy and thriving, it was seen as a sign of good fortune. But if the parliament abandoned the rookery, then there was going to be a death imminent in the family or something, or something really bad was going to happen.
Kind of like the ravens in the Tower of London.
Yeah, exactly. But if your land didn't have anything, or didn't have a rookery, and a new rookery was established, it's kind of considered like a ticking clock.
Oh.
Even though it's like, so it's good if you have them, but it's bad if they leave. But if they come, it's kind of like good and bad.
Oh.
So it's like you can't really win.
That's tricky, yeah.
Can't really win. Now moving on to the blue jay. What is a group of blue jays called?
Ooh, oh, shoot.
A little less cool than everything else.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it just like a flock?
A party or a band.
Party.
A band is also pretty
I like
common.
A party.
I know one of our listeners, Lauren, was asking about the bully allegations of blue jays. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as passerines go, passerines being birds that
perch. Yep.
They are fairly aggressive. I think a lot of it comes down to their call, which sounds very harsh.
It does sound very harsh.
It sounds like no matter what, they're just yelling at you. And I don't think blue jays are mean per se. Like, I don't think blue jays seek out fights like a bully might. Mm-hmm. But if you start one with a blue jay,
it's gonna end
it.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, some really quick references to blue jays in mythology. In Christianity, they're actually considered like a positive, they're a good sign for like encouragement and determination to like fulfill your task. So if you see a blue jay, it's supposed to fill you with sense of motivation and like kind of like conviction in whatever you're doing. There's a lot of Native American tales about blue jays being liars and tricksters, and I think that's kind of due to the fact that they're mimics.
Yeah. Did you know, Keshav, that blue jays can mimic a red-tailed hawk?
Oh, actually, I think I've heard of that. This one thing I found in like Hindu mythology is it's very specific. It's kind of interesting. If a blue jay has bones or worms in its mouth and you see it on your right hand side, it means you're gonna come into money soon.
Oh, that's sick.
I did not find like a explanation or like it's just that, and it's like, yeah, take it or leave it.
Wow. Oh, I love things like that.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm gonna start walking around. Anytime I hear a blue jay, I'm shifting to my right.
A little 180. Yeah. I don't know why, but I thought this was funny. Like Italian mythology, in Italian history, I guess they're seen as braggadocious and boastful. So if you see one, they kind of think it means that someone is resentful towards you. Someone in your inner circle is resentful towards you.
Wow.
Or like your actions or whatever you're putting out into the world. But it can also be interpreted as those that you're close to having jealousy for you as well.
Ooh. So with blue jays,
yeah,
we also kind of see this good and bad aspect that we've been seeing with the other corvids, right?
Exactly.
Next time I see a blue jay, I'm going to imagine that, I don't know, like my cousin is jealous of me or something.
Or people see you as braggadocious and boastful.
Ooh, yeah, I guess double-edged sword, huh? Mm-hmm. I'll just make sure it's on the right side of me.
Yeah, I mean, we are making a podcast. Like, who the hell are we, right?
Yeah. This whole podcast is just a vanity project, so I guess they kind of got me there.
So, yeah, I mean, that's what I wanted to talk about corvids here. There are a lot of different cultures that, incorporate corvids into their history and mythology. I just wanted to touch on each of these, main groups of corvids, like ravens, crows, rooks, and jays, specifically the blue jay here. And show that, like, while many people think, and rightfully so, as we see throughout history, like, they're seen as a bad omen, they're associated with death, darkness, that kind of thing. It wasn't always the case, though. There are aspects of them that have shown to be considered lucky or even a sign of good fortune in a lot of different cases.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I've always been a fan of corvids, as I think I've said on earlier episodes, like blue jays were one of my favorite birds growing up. Mm-hmm. So it's cool to know that it's not all just like doom and gloom when it comes to crows, murders, unkindness,
Yeah.
That there's also just some nuance there.
Yeah, a lot of nuance there, and I think people do have a lot to say about these birds and have a lot of feeling towards them, just because of like how there are some similarities to humans that we were talking about, like communication through calls, or like I guess birds in general. But the intelligence factor of these birds is really
like the cooperation of crows.
Yeah,
and I guess also just because they're so ubiquitous. I mean, you see corvids all over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think somewhere in the book he references someone that says that the concept of habitat like kind of doesn't even apply to corvids, just because they're so adaptive. They're scavengers, which is like way of acquiring food is very conducive to just being able to live in a lot of different places. Right. They said like second only to peregrine falcons, which you mentioned earlier, like live on skyscrapers now. Like they're totally fine.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome adaptations. Awesome corvids. Tell us your favorite name for a group of corvids in an email.
Yeah, I think mine's got to be an unkindness.
Unkindness is great.
An unkindness of ravens.
Yeah, and bad news to all my grackle fans out there. Grackles aren't corvids. If I've ever talked to you about grackles in the past, I've led you astray.
It's okay. This is a learning process for everyone.
Yeah. All right.
Speaking of learning process.
Well, that brings us to our final section. As we've talked about, birds like to communicate through sounds. Humans like to hear those sounds. Unless you're us, because then we have to guess what sounds they're coming from. So, we're on to our bird call quiz. Do we know what the scoreboard is looking like?
It might be 3-2.
I want to say 3-2.
Yeah. It's been a while since we last did one of these.
It has been.
I don't know who went first last time. You can just play it for me first.
Okay. Definitely one we've seen at Heinz.
I request a question.
Yes.
I will pose you a question. Mm-hmm. Did we hear it today?
We might have heard it today.
I'm going to go with a Carolina wren.
You got it.
Yeah.
On the dot. Kesh is good at this.
We both literally identified a Carolina wren without seeing it by sound today, but it just feels so nerve-wracking when we're here.
I know.
Like, I'm like...
I second guess everything.
Like in the moment, we were like, oh yeah, obviously Carolina wren. And now we're like, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know. You have no idea what it's like on this side of the microphone.
Yeah.
Listeners.
The thing with the Carolina wren is, too, it has so many different songs.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to play you a bird call now.
Interesting.
We haven't seen one in a while, but we definitely saw like a lot this summer.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So it has kind of a sound that I feel like a bird that's sort of watery has, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a seagull. I'm between some sort of peep or what they call a seahawk, an osprey.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to go with osprey.
You got it.
Hey.
I think I definitely see where you were going with the peeps. They do have similar like high-pitched screechy calls, mm-hmm. But yeah, what made you think osprey?
It just seemed a little more predatorial, I guess.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm wondering if the cadence of it.
I think the way it speeds up like that.
Yeah. Because yeah, I don't know if I would have been able to. Like, we both know what ospreys sound like, but the peeps kind of sound like that as well.
They do, yeah.
So, yeah, good job parsing that one out.
Both of us scored 4-3 now,
mm-hmm.
Which is better than any of you at home are doing. We do have a few social media things.
Mm-hmm.
We have, obviously, our Instagram. That's kind of our main posting platform. It's at BirdsAreRealPod. We also have a TikTok, which maybe we'll post on sometimes. Who knows? Also at BirdsAreRealPod. As always, we have our email. Please send us emails with questions, comments, anything you'd like. That is birdsarereal.pod@gmail.com. And our YouTube, which is also, I believe, at BirdsAreRealPod. Here's something I'd love for everyone to do. Go to our most recent Instagram post and share it on your story. Get the word out to your friends. They may not know that we exist, but they're your friends, so they probably like the same things that you like.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Whatever the most recent post is, just go ahead and share that. Unless it doesn't make sense to share, then share the most recent one that makes sense to share. Any closing words, Kesh?
If you enjoyed us talking about some mythology today, let us know about a different bird you want featured in a future episode.
Lots of birds, lots of mythologies we could go through.
Mm-hmm. If you had a big sit today, or if you participated in a big day, also let us know. It was a great time today.
Great time.
Really lovely.
Yeah. Let us know. If you have a list of 67 plus birds from your big sit today, let us know. If it's anything less than that, you failed.
Yeah.